It's our pleasure, as always, to welcome Mike Ferrin back to the show. Jon and Jim, San Diego Sports 760. Mike from MLB Network Radio really is dialed in, as you're going to find, covering baseball's second half about to get underway this weekend. Mike, we appreciate it. Let's just start with the 30,000-foot view of the Padres. 50-49. There's been some good. There's been some bad. They closed 1-6. If the season was over, they're a game out, but they're right in it. How do you feel in general about where they are?
I can't help it. You know me, I'm always kind of a forward-looking guy.
Yeah.
But I can't help but feel like last week, especially with the way the Dodgers played, was a missed opportunity. Don't you guys?
Agreed.
Oh, yeah.
Like part of it, it's like, man, if you can, go, even if, like, say you lose the series to the Diamondbacks, but you split with Seattle and you take 2 out of 3 from Atlanta, like all of a sudden the division really feels like it's in play. So I think that's I don't want to say clouded my judgment, but let's put it this way. If I were with the Padres, I probably would have spent the last couple of days, kicking at the dust bunnies in the corner of my house, just something like that. Or in this case, it's giant mounds of dog hair. But like that kind of stuff, just being frustrated by what had happened. That said, I think they're really well positioned. I think they're a pretty good team. I think they should be a little bit concerned about Arizona charging because they're starting to get healthy. But I also don't think the Mets are all that good, and I don't think St. Louis is all that good. And so, there's a path for those teams. And, the way the Dodgers have played, the back half of the Dodgers lineup isn't very good, and they have a lot of pitching injuries. It's not like the division the lead is insurmountable. You know what I mean? Like, it's big, but it's not crazy big. So I think once you get past the frustration of what happened the week before the All-Star break, take a deep breath. You go, man, this team really played pretty well for most of the first half, and they should be poised to be in the mix for a playoff berth, if not one of the favorites.
We know AJ Preller. He is going to be very active at the deadline, but
you don't say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, water's wet. But just talking about the Dodgers and how they've stumbled here and how many teams are in contention in all of baseball, how difficult do you think it's going to be for Preller to pull off maybe what he wants to pull off with so many teams needing pitching and in the race and not being sellers?
I don't know that I would classify pitching as being their main need. I know that that's popular. I mean, listen, everybody needs another bullpen arm, right? Like even the Braves, who have an incredible bullpen, would probably love to have another bullpen arm. You can never have enough pitching. And I'm sure that there is some depth that they'd like to have in the rotation. Adam Mazur looked like it's his first go-round on the big league. Mm-hmm. And I like his stuff, but, I think he's probably he was kind of forced into action. I think the good news is that Musgrove sounds like he's on the road back, and hopefully that will help some. But, I think there's probably a need for some starting depth. And you're right, everybody needs that. And I think they have a clear need for another outfielder. And I think they're working on that, too. And as much as it's easy to say, well, there's, 21 teams in contention still. There's 12 within 3.5 games of playoff spot in the NL. And then in the AL, you have, these there's like 9 teams that are involved. You got to count Texas because even though they're under 500, they're only 5 games out in their division. That's still, a third of the league that's out of the race. And unlike in the last couple of seasons where the teams that were out of it were just terrible teams, these teams that are well out of the mix all have players that are somewhat appealing via trade. I think the White Sox are a great example of that, right? Like they weren't one of the ones that was racing to the bottom. They were trying to win, and now they have the most attractive trade chip on the mound. And they have some interesting, players. And Luis Robert Jr. would be a really interesting acquire as an outfielder. So, they have some good players. I think Oakland has some better players, whether it's a reliever like Lucas Erceg or if you could talk them into a deal for Brent Rooker. I know the Padres have had once before, but certainly would fit some of their needs. Even a guy like if Paul Blackburn's healthy, it's not like that guy's a star, but he gets you innings. The White Sox have Eric Fetty, too, who's been really good for them. So there's a ton of players that should be helpful, even if they're not the super sexiest names. on all these teams that are willing to deal. And so that's, I think, what's different about this trade deadline is, yes, we have a lot of teams that are still in the mix, but the ones who aren't have really helpful players for contending teams. And I do wonder if the other part of it is that because there's competition for them, that helps to goose up the price. Listen, AJ Preller is not going to be afraid of the price tag on anybody in the end, but I actually think that's kind of healthier for baseball because that helps those teams potentially get back into contention faster. Now, that's kind of a more big D baseball view than, looking at each team individually that's in the pennant race or in the mix. But I think this has a chance to be a very active trade deadline, even if none of the names that move are like the ones that make you go, oh my gosh, that's a blockbuster.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. Mike Ferrin, MLB Network Radio with us. So obviously a couple years ago, they make this, massive move for Juan Soto, like a generational move. Well, Juan Soto isn't available. But from like AJ Preller's perspective, 10th year, you'd think he's got to get into the postseason here. They were 82 and 80 last year. But it's not get into the postseason above all else, right? Like you'd be vastly surprised if they moved their top prospects, like the top of the top, the Ethan Salases, the Leo DeVrieses, or should you expect anything because it's AJ Preller?
I mean, I think both, right? Like I would be surprised if they moved those guys. Because I think that, I know from talking to him in spring training, we were talking a little bit about DeVries. I think it was basically like, you need to go see this guy. So I think he's pretty excited about him. But I think, there's always, he's also a realist about there's always a price. Like, if you end up with a superstar, a young superstar level player that you can acquire for, 4 or 5 years of control, I think they absolutely would trade them and he'd be right to. So, again, it just kind of depends on what the deal is. Now, if you're looking at the names that are being mentioned that are available at the trade deadline, I don't think there's anybody that really rises to that level. And, quite frankly, he's pushed in a fair amount of his trade capital that he has, at least the guys that are established in the minor leagues, in making the 2 deals to get Cease and Arise. So, he's not necessarily working from the position of strength that he was on, say, March 1st in terms of the depth of the organization, but he still has some pretty good players that he can deal to be able to acquire what he wants. And so I think there's, I would be shocked if he were to move Salas or DeVries. But, the next group down, is he willing to talk about Robbie Snelling? Is he willing to talk about, Dylan Lesko? Is he willing to talk about Graham Pauley? I think those are names that are absolutely reasonable ones to consider, and I think they're ones that teams would be interested in. It's just not going to net you, the biggest name. But then again, I don't know that there's a biggest name that's going to get moved.
One of the names I think you could say is the top of the list. We got about 30 seconds here. Garrett Crochet, definitively in your mind, going to get traded?
Yeah, I think the White Sox really have. His value is never going to be higher, and he's only 2 years beyond this year. So you've got him for 2 years in the pennant race. They're not going to be good in that time. He was not interested in signing an extension. I think he gets moved. He'll get the best haul in terms of prospects, but it comes with risk because he has already exceeded his career total in Major League innings this season.
Yeah, it feels like a great fit for someone at 25 and 26, not necessarily right now in the second half of 2024. Mike, always appreciate it. Thank you for doing it here in San Diego. Let's do it again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, guys, we're 2 weeks from the trade deadline, so anything you need.
I appreciate it. That's
Thanks,
great
man.
stuff. Mike Ferrin, MLB Network.